Karen fired up a chainsaw at 9:15 a.m. and cut straight through my backyard fence, just because walking to the mailbox took her an extra 30 seconds. In the end, I bought her entire property and turned it into a dog park. But let's rewind, because that wild morning was only the beginning of the most unbelievable HOA revenge story you've ever heard. I was sipping coffee in my kitchen when the roar of power tools echoed way too close to my house. I looked outside. There she was, my HOA president, dressed in designer yoga pants and safety goggles, hacking into my 6-foot cedar fence like she was competing in the Suburban Chainsaw Olympics. Her reasoning? Shortcut saves me time, and I have important HOA business. Yes, you heard that right, important HOA business with a chainsaw at 7 in the morning. Wood chips flew like confetti. The smell of sawdust mixed with her expensive perfume, and she stood there smiling as if she'd just done the neighborhood a favor instead of destroying private property. I smiled back, grabbed my phone, and started recording what would soon become the most expensive mistake of her life. So tell me, what would you have done in that moment? Call the cops immediately or let her dig herself in deeper? Thoughts in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Stories, because trust me, these neighborhood nightmares are everywhere now. Let me back up. 4 months earlier, I was Ethan Walker, a recently divorced electrician, trying to rebuild my life after my marriage fell apart. The settlement left me with just enough to buy a modest ranch house in Willowbrook Estates, one of those picture-perfect suburban developments that promise family-friendly HOA management and community living. What they don't mention in the brochure is that your neighbors might bring chainsaws to the party. I picked Willowbrook for one reason: stability for my twin daughters. Lily and Chloe, they were 6-year-old, living with me every other weekend. And after months of cramped apartments and awkward custody exchanges in parking lots, I wanted a real home. A backyard where we could plant vegetables, build tree forts, and finally live out all the dad dreams I'd been clinging to through long, lonely Thursday nights. The place felt perfect. 3 bedrooms, a decent-sized yard, and a quiet street, where kids could ride bikes without dodging traffic. Willowbrook looked like suburban paradise. 47 homes built in the 90s. It's mostly families and retirees, with neighbors who actually waved when they drove past. HOA dues were $85 a month, supposedly covering landscaping and snow removal. Everyone seemed welcoming. Next door, the Hendersons, an older couple, brought me cookies that actually tasted homemade. Across the street, the Garcias family had kids, who immediately adopted my girls into their sidewalk chalk empire. For a moment, it felt like I'd finally found peace. But in neighborhoods like this, too much perfection is usually a warning sign. I spent the first 6 months renovating like a man possessed, partly because the house needed it, and partly because staying busy kept me from drowning in silence when my daughters weren't there. I built a workshop shed for side jobs, raised garden beds, and most importantly, a brand new fence around the backyard. That fence was my pride. Enjoy 6-foot cedar boards, galvanized hardware, installed 2 full feet inside my property line. I even paid for a survey to avoid future disputes. My divorce lawyer had drilled it into my head. Boundary fights are expensive headaches. Do it right or you'll pay later. But that fence blocked the shortcut Karen DeLewis, my corner lot neighbor and longtime HOA president, had been using to get to the community mailboxes. Before I moved in, she'd been cutting straight through my property. Now, she had to walk the long way around an extra 30 seconds, just like every other person on the planet. To most people, it's nothing. To Karen, it was apparently an act of war. She'd been HOA president for 4 years, mostly because no one else wanted the job. Her elections rarely pulled more than a dozen votes. She lived in the biggest house on the block, drove a white Escalade with vanity plates that literally read HOA Queen, and carried herself like suburban royalty. Kids feared her. Parents crossed the street to avoid her. And she was infamous for measuring grass with a ruler and sending violation letters written in red ink. Like some twisted HOA blood oath, her first attempt at diplomacy was almost comical. 1 day after I finished the fence, she showed up at my door with a fake smile and a plate of store-bought cookies still in the plastic. I was wondering if you'd consider installing a gate for community access. She said sweetly, like she was offering me a chance to donate to charity. I explained politely that it was my property, my privacy, and my daughter's safety. Zone. Her smile cracked, and her face went through this wild transformation like a computer freezing before it crashes. 1 day later, I found a violation notice taped to my door. Apparently, my fence broke community aesthetic standards under Section 12.3 billion of the bylaws, a $200 fine, increasing $50 per day until I complied. Only one problem. When I actually read the bylaws, Section 12.3b didn't exist. C. My divorce had taught me a valuable skill. Always demand specifics in writing, because people love to invent rules when they think you won't check. Most homeowners would have just paid to avoid the fight. But I wasn't most homeowners anymore. Karen's next move? She called an emergency HOA board meeting. Now that sounds official till you realize the board was just Karen. Her loyal neighbor Todd, and one mysteriously vacant seat. The meeting, held in Karen's living room, where democracy apparently smelled like scented candles. I only found out thanks to Mrs. Whitman, who whispered at the mailbox that they'd voted on my fence. According to the official minutes already typed up, my fence created a safety hazard and hurt property values. The whole thing was staged. But what Karen didn't know is that my divorce had also turned me into a research machine. Someone tries to ruin your life with paperwork. You learn to treat fine print like survival training. I spent an entire Saturday at the county clerk's office, digging through records. And guess what? My fence was 100% legal, properly permitted, and on my land. Better yet, Karen's emergency meeting broke the original 1992 covenants, which required 7 days' notice for all residents. Her little kangaroo court wasn't just shady, it was illegal. That night, I struck back, anonymous. I printed 47 flyers titled "Your Neighbor Who Actually Reads the Fine Print," complete with copies of real property laws and HOA rules. At midnight, I dropped one into every mailbox, except Karen's. Sometimes the best way to fight a bully is by pulling back the curtain and letting everyone else see the truth. Karen's operation thrived on ignorance. But sunlight? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And Karen was about to find out that when you play dirty, the neighborhood doesn't always stay quiet. Thursday brought an unexpected visit from a county inspector, responding to anonymous complaints about unpermitted electrical work. He spent 20 minutes checking my upgrades, only to confirm everything was perfectly legal, before apologizing for wasting my time. By Monday, Karen had a new tactic, parading her designer poodle along my fence twice a day, letting it claim my yard one puddle at a time. But something surprising was happening. While I was out weeding, Mrs. Whitman whispered to me like we were plotting a secret rebellion. "We got violation letters too," she said, shaking her head about her 15-year-old garden gnome, now being labeled unauthorized. That same evening, the Garcias Fomley shared their story. Karen had demanded they remove their unauthorized ethnic decorations, which turned out to be beautiful terracotta planters filled with succulents. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. Karen wasn't targeting one neighbor. She was systematically intimidating the entire community. The breaking point came Friday morning. I was in the garage building a bookshelf for my daughters. It was barely 6 p.m. when Karen called the police, claiming an industrial noise disturbance. Officer Hayes arrived, clearly annoyed, measured the sound levels with a proper meter, and found nothing wrong. Before leaving, he quietly warned me, "We get calls about this address every month, different complaints, and never any real violations. Thought you should know." It's when everything clicked. I installed security cameras that weekend, perfectly legal, since they only covered my own property. And more importantly, I started attending HOA meetings. Up until then, they were a little more than Karen lecturing while Todd nodded like a bobblehead. But my lawyer had drilled into me one truth: documentation beats emotion every time. So I began keeping detailed record dates, times, witnesses, everything. Patterns started to emerge, and Karen's pattern was harassment, plain and simple. She noticed the cameras within hours and hand-delivered a note demanding their removal. That same evening, I sent her a certified letter calmly explaining my right to protect my property. When she had to sign for that letter, her face told the whole story like someone realizing they'd been playing checkers while everyone else had moved on to chess. But the real twist came next. 3 neighbors showed up at my door carrying their own stacks of bogus violation letters. Mrs. Whitman's gnome, the Garcias family's planters. Even quiet Mr. Wallace had been cited for his American flag being improperly displayed. What I thought was a personal dispute was actually a neighborhood-wide campaign of intimidation. And suddenly, I wasn't fighting alone. Karen had made her biggest mistake. She'd revealed just how many people she had been targeting. And once neighbors started talking, the tide began to turn, because bullies only thrive in silence. Then came the infamous chainsaw morning exactly. 1 week after I installed those cameras, Thursday, 9:15 a.m. I was buttoning my work shirt when I heard power tools roaring far too close. At first I thought it was road work, but when I looked out my kitchen window, my jaw dropped. There was Karen, in designer yoga pants, chainsaw in hand, cutting straight through my fence like she was auditioning for some bizarre suburban demolition contest. I grabbed my phone and started recording. She carved a perfect 4-foot section out of the fence, scattering cedar chunks into my tomato plants like twisted confetti. The smell of sawdust mixed with her perfume turned my backyard into something out of a fever dream. Then, as if this was completely normal, she improvised hinges using my fence posts, creating her own personal shortcut because walking 30 extra seconds was apparently too much effort. When I stepped outside, Karen looked up with the confidence of someone who thought she was saving the neighborhood. "I'm creating emergency access for community safety," she declared, wood chips clinging to her expensive workout top. "You can bill the HOA for damages." I kept my voice calm and my camera rolling. "Ma'am, you're destroying my property with power tools." Her response? Peak entitlement. "I'm improving community infrastructure for everyone's benefit." I called the police. Officer Hayes showed up 20 minutes later, clearly frustrated to be dragged into this circus again. By then, Karen had completely shifted her act, going from chainsaw-wielding vandal to tearful, concerned mom claiming I had threatened her while she was just trying to help the neighborhood. But the video told a very different story. That's when Marcus Delroy pulled up in his luxury sedan, dressed in a $1,000 suit. He was Karen's husband and a senior partner at a powerful municipal law firm. Within minutes, Karen went from reckless vandal to supposed victim, while Marcus spun the story into a legal game of chess. "Officer," Hayes pulled me aside and gave me blunt advice. "Press charges now, or this doesn't stop until someone gets seriously hurt. People like this only stop when the law makes them stop." That afternoon, I filed criminal charges for property destruction. But I didn't stop. There I started digging into Marcus's contracts. What I found was worse than Karen's tantrums. His firm was pulling in over $200,000 a year from county contract snow removal, landscaping, legal services, the exact same things our HOA claimed to competitively bid. Karen wasn't just power tripping. She might have been running a corruption scheme, channeling HOA funds into her own household. Our dues had tripled during her 4 years as president, yet services never improved. Meanwhile, Marcus's firm conveniently landed no-bid contracts across the board. The retaliation suddenly made sense. Every neighbor who questioned finances or asked about transparency was punished with bogus violations. Mrs. Whitman's gnome letter came right after she asked about budget discrepancies. The Garcias family's solar panels got flagged after they pushed for open contractor bidding. Even Sarah's kid's swing set became non-compliant. Hours after she raised concerns, Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them, but her grip started to slip. She filed complaints that my security cameras violated privacy standards that didn't even exist in the bylaws. She called an emergency meeting to accuse me of threatening behavior, expecting her usual handful of loyal supporters. Instead, 12 residents showed up demanding answers. When I played the chainsaw video, the room went silent, and then Eleanor Matsushima, the quiet elderly woman who had lived here since the neighborhood was built, stood up with a folder thick with documents. "I've been reviewing our governing records," she said firmly, "and none of these violations have any legal basis." It turns out Eleanor was a retired paralegal. She had been documenting every one of Karen's unlawful actions for months, waiting for the right moment. She showed us proof that Karen's extra rules violated both our original covenants and state HOA laws. She even offered to help me file formal complaints with state oversight boards I didn't even know existed. For the first time, Karen looked rattled, like someone realizing she'd been bluffing with her cards face up, and the entire table could see. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame cracked, then tore out of the parking lot like she was fleeing a crime scene. As I watched her taillights vanish, Mrs. Whitman gripped my arm with surprising strength. She once tried to fine us for our grandson's birthday party being too loud. She whispered, 8-year-old kids singing happy birthday was, apparently, a noise violation. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about one unreasonable neighbor. We were unraveling years of intimidation that had poisoned our entire community. One bogus violation at a time. Karen's lawyer husband entered the fight like a corporate shark who'd smelled blood in perfectly trimmed suburban waters. Marcus DeLoqua showed up at my door one Thursday evening, carrying a briefcase worth more than my truck. He handed me a cease and desist letter, printed on such fancy letterhead you'd think it belonged in a museum. The demands were blunt. Take down my security cameras, stop harassing his wife, and pay $3,000 in damages for the emotional distress I'd supposedly caused. The real message was even clearer. Back down, or we'll bury you in legal battles you can't afford. But my divorce had taught me to recognize legal intimidation for what it was, so I called Patricia Hang, the HOA specialist Eleanor had recommended. Patricia glanced at Marcus's letter and immediately burst out laughing. "This is the most blatant abuse case I've seen in 15 years, she said between chuckles. "And trust me, I've seen some real disasters. Your neighbor's husband just committed multiple ethics violations in a single document. Turns out, threatening residents while serving as their HOA's attorney created a massive conflict of interest. That kind of misconduct could cost Marcus's law licenses, since his firm was also profiting off HOA contracts. Patricia ordered a full title search of every property in Willowbrook. It sounded boring, but 3 days later, her call made my coffee cup slip right out of my hands. Karen's corner lot had been designated as community green space forever. According to the original 1992 developer agreements, her $600,000 home was sitting on land that legally belonged to all of us. Every upgrade she'd made, the pool house, the extended driveway, even her beloved garden, technically belonged to the neighborhood. She'd been acting like a dictator on land she never actually owned. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with her own chainsaw. While Patricia uncovered this legal bombshell, Eleanor was rallying residents at the library. With the efficiency of a retired paralegal who'd been training for this her whole life, 23 households showed up, more community engagement than we'd seen during Karen's entire 6-year reign. I presented our harassment timeline while Eleanor explained the legal context. Watching neighbors realize they'd been systematically scammed was like watching light bulbs turn on in a dark neighborhood. When we voted on demanding Karen's resignation and a financial audit, the result was so unanimous you could feel the collective sigh of relief echoing through the room. But Karen didn't surrender. She went nuclear. She filed harassment complaints with the sheriff, claiming Eleanor and I were running a criminal conspiracy. She submitted edited video that made me look aggressive, conveniently cutting the parts where she was destroying my fence with power tools. She even tried to block me from attending HOA meetings with restraining orders, weaponizing the courts to silence oversight. But desperation breeds mistakes. The Hendersons revealed she had offered them $500 in cash to sign false statements backing her claims. Sarah shared that Karen promised to erase her kid's swing set violation in exchange for testimony about me being threatening. It was obvious she was manufacturing evidence and bribing witnesses. That's not just HOA abuse, that's felony territory. Then came her worst mistake, the one that turned frustration into parental fury. Karen cornered my daughters at their elementary school. She offered them candy while asking questions about Daddy and whether I ever acted scary at home. Several parents saw it happen and immediately reported it to the principal. who banned Karen from all school property on the spot when my ex-wife called. Furious about some stranger interrogating our kids, I realized Karen had escalated from property disputes to full-blown character assassination, using 8-year-old children as weapons. That was the breaking point. The community woke up. Neighbors started documenting everything Karen did, building an evidence file thicker than a phone book. Each desperate move she made only strengthened our case and destroyed her credibility. Local reporters began sniffing around. HOA gossip turned into corruption headlines. Suddenly, Karen looked less like a president and more like a suburban mob boss. Patricia filed for emergency hearings, while Eleanor uncovered $23,000 in HOA funds quietly paid to Marcus's law firm for vague services. The money trail showed landscaping contracts handed to Marcus's friends without bids, plus year-round snow removal bills. In a state where snow only fell a few months of the year, this wasn't just bad management. It was organized theft with good landscaping. But here's the twist. While we built our case, Karen was building her downfall. Her behavior had grown so unhinged that even her allies started backing away. Todd, her most loyal supporter, finally found a spine and began questioning her decisions. And when your biggest cheerleader starts walking away, you know you've gone too far. The question was no longer if Karen would crash and burn. It was whether she'd drag the whole neighborhood down with her. That's when Eleanor called me. At 8:47 a.m. on a Thursday, I was sipping my coffee, but the urgency in her voice made me set it down and brace myself against the counter. "Jake," she said, practically shaking with excitement, "I found something at the courthouse that changes everything." I could hear papers rustling like she was holding evidence from a crime scene. She'd dug into old property records and discovered the original 1992 developer agreements, buried in a filing cabinet no one had touched since the 90s, and hidden. In the legal jargon was the clause that changed everything. Karen's corner lot was never meant to be private property. It was permanently designated as community green space. The realization hit like an anvil. Her $650,000 house. The pool house, the driveway, the rose garden, all of it, sat illegally on land owned by every resident of Willowbrook Estates. She wasn't a queen of the neighborhood. She was an extremely well-dressed squatter. Patricia's verdict was simple and devastating. We could force Karen to buy the land at market value, demand she sell the house back to the community, or drag her through years of litigation that would likely cost her everything, sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by the smell of cooling coffee and the soft glow of morning sunlight streaming through the very windows. Karen once tried to regulate with her imaginary bylaws. I felt something unexpected. Instead of the rush of victory I had been waiting for all these months, a heavy weight settled in my stomach, like I had swallowed a stone. This discovery gave us the power to dismantle Karen's hold on our neighborhood as completely as she had tried to dismantle our community. But now that the opportunity for perfect revenge was in front of me, it felt strangely awful. Eleanor seemed to sense my hesitation, even through the phone. "We're not here to destroy lives, Jake," she said in that calm, steady voice that explained why she had been such an effective paralegal. "We're here to restore fairness and rebuild our community. There's a difference between justice and cruelty, and that difference defines the kind of people we choose to be." That evening, our emergency meeting filled the library's conference room with 34 residents, the largest turnout we had ever seen. The air buzzed with nervous energy, and the smell of institutional coffee mixed with the tension of anticipation. Eleanor presented her findings with the precision of someone who had spent decades navigating legal documents. Watching our neighbors' faces shift as the truth sank in was like witnessing a wave of realization ripple through the room in slow motion. The psychological shift was immediate. In just 20 minutes, Karen went from neighborhood dictator to legal tenant. We weren't just fighting harassment anymore. We were managing a real estate crisis that would test our character as a community. Karen, notably, skipped the meeting, despite receiving a hand-delivered invitation. Neighbors later reported seeing a moving truck parked in her driveway that same morning. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. The question was no longer whether we would win. The question was what kind of victory we wanted to claim: justice or revenge. The choice was now ours, spelled out in black and white documents that smelled of old paper and possibilities. The strategy session felt like something between a town hall and a military operation, instead of planning road repairs or troop movements. We were democratically deciding the future of our accidental real estate empire. Eleanor had secured the library's largest room, its air thick with the scent of old books and industrial carpet cleaner. 28 residents arrived with notebooks, travel mugs, and a grim determination usually reserved for courtroom dramas or family interventions. I stood at the front, looking out at neighbors who had shifted from suspicious strangers into genuine allies during months of conflict. Mrs. Whitman sat in the front row with a legal pad full of meticulous notes, looking like a court stenographer ready for the trial of the century. The Garcias family filled an entire row, their kids doing homework while their parents carefully took notes. Even Mr. Wallace wore his best tie, treating the meeting like the most important business of his retirement. "We have 3 paths forward," I began, feeling like a game show host about to reveal 3 mysterious doors. Option 1, the nuclear approach. Immediate legal action to reclaim the land. Karen loses everything, probably faces bankruptcy, and we gain a prime corner lot for community use. But it comes with years of litigation, high costs, and the reputation of being the neighborhood that destroys families. The room went silent. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt louder than ever. Finally, Sarah raised her hand, her voice hesitant. "What happens to their son?" The question hit hard. Everyone shifted uncomfortably, reminded that total victory meant real collateral damage, especially to kids who never asked to be dragged into their mother's battles. Option 2, continued, is the buyout solution. Karen purchases the land at fair market value, $180,000. The money funds community improvements. They keep their home, but lose control of the HOA. Everyone moves forward with dignity, fairness, and no destroyed lives weighing on our conscience. Eleanor nodded from her seat by the window, sunlight catching the silver in her hair, making her look like a wise figure presiding over the moment. She had been pushing for this balanced approach from the beginning, reminding us that justice heals communities, while vengeance leaves scars. Option 3, I added, is compromise. A reduced payment of $90,000, plus immediate resignation and a public apology. It gives us improvement funding while allowing them to stay with a smaller financial blow. It's a test of whether reconciliation is possible after all this conflict. We voted by secret ballot, neighbors, marking index cards with the kind of hushed intensity that made the process feel almost sacred. When Eleanor tallied the results, the answer was clear. Option 2 had won, with 18 votes. 7, and only 3, chose nuclear war. The community had spoken. We wanted justice, with mercy, not revenge served cold. Patricia's legal plan was brilliantly simple: file a quiet title action to establish community ownership while offering a voluntary settlement. That created a 30-day deadline, giving Karen time to make a rational choice while protecting our legal position. Best of all, the costs would come from the settlement itself, meaning no resident risked a financial hit. The following budget meeting felt like a Christmas morning for anyone who had ever wondered where HOA dues actually disappeared, Lena revealed. A transparent plan for the $180,000 windfall, and faces lit up like kids opening presents. Priority 1, hire a professional management company for $12,000 a year, ending the era of amateur dictatorship. Priority 2, install $35,000 worth of accessible playground equipment, swings, slides, and real joy for our kids. Priority 3, create a $15,000 community garden with raised beds and irrigation, producing food we could share with the local food bank. The remaining funds would go into reserves, ensuring stability for years to come. For the first time in years, people felt excited about HOA finances instead of dreading them. Transparency was transforming us from suspicious neighbors into engaged partners in building a stronger community. Meanwhile, I spent evenings repairing the chainsaw damage to my fence, This time I used premium materials and added a decorative gate that opened toward the future community garden. Turning destruction into beauty felt like the perfect metaphor for everything we were accomplishing. Sometimes the best way to respond to someone tearing down your boundaries is to build something stronger and more lasting in its place. The professional management company Eleanor found specialized in communities recovering from dysfunctional boards. With 15 years of experience, they offered transparent accounting, professional meeting facilitation, and guaranteed compliance with state regulations. The cost was far less than continued fighting, proving that sometimes the smartest investment isn't in revenge, but in rebuilding. Karen's all out. The counterattack landed like a legal tsunami, crashing into a small beach town that had never seen the ocean turn violent. Her attorney, Marcus, served papers to 15 residents at the exact same time, accusing us of running a criminal conspiracy and demanding $500,000 in damages. Top of that, he filed restraining orders that would have stopped us from so much as looking at one another in passing. It was a viciously clever move. The strategy wasn't about winning in court, it was about draining every household dry with endless legal bills. Because if you can't win on facts, you can try to bury people under paperwork until they break from financial exhaustion. Within hours, the media circus began. Karen went on Channel 7 News, painting herself as the helpless victim of a neighborhood mob. She wore her softest cardigan, one that probably cost more than my car payment, tan shared carefully. Edited clips that cast her as a suburban saint under siege. On the surface, she looked calm. Underneath the perfume and staged tears was the sour scent of fear. Watching that broadcast felt like living in a parallel world where chainsaws were gardening tools and property damage counted as community service. But desperation pushes people past boundaries they'd never cross in calmer times. And Karen was now operating in full survival mode. Her campaign escalated quickly. A private investigator showed up at my workplace telling my boss I was unstable and dangerous. Fake complaints poured into the state licensing board, questioning my electrical work despite every project being fully inspected and approved. Worst of all, she targeted my family. Karen spread rumors at my daughter's school, spurring to parents that I was unfit as a father. The intimidation spread with military precision. Neighbors received threatening letters from Marcus's firm, warning of personal lawsuits that could wipe out their life savings. Eleanor, a retired paralegal, suddenly faced an Adult Protective Services investigation, claiming she was being exploited by unstable neighbors. The Garcias family, U.S. citizens longer than I'd been alive, discovered someone had reported them to immigration authorities. Karen's willingness to harm elderly neighbors and innocent families revealed the true depth of her cruelty. Then, she froze our HOA's bank accounts, claiming mismanagement. Winter hit, and without funds, even snow removal became impossible. Residents were now burning through $15,000. A month in legal defense just to survive the onslaught. Karen's financial warfare was working. Most families couldn't hold out indefinitely. And then she crossed the ultimate line. Karen approached my daughters at school. Lily and Chloe were cornered on the playground and asked if they're dads. Friends were scary at home. Other parents intervened immediately, horrified, but that image has haunted me ever since. The school principal called later to inform me Karen was permanently banned from school grounds. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. That night, my ex-wife called. Her voice carried an anger edged with fear. Some strange woman cornered me in the grocery store asking about your mental health. Jake, this person is dangerous. What is going on over there? Hearing real concern from someone who had divorced me was somehow more terrifying than Marcus's lawsuits. But Karen's nuclear strategy was unraveling. Her surveillance operation was burning through money faster than a sinking yacht, and her law firm partners were reportedly furious over the flood of frivolous lawsuits that threatened their major contracts. Sometimes the best tactic is simply letting an opponent hand themselves enough rope to collapse under their own weight. Officer Hayes began regular patrols, not because of Karen's complaints, but because her behavior had crossed into criminal territory. During one stop, he revealed something chilling. 17 complaints in 30 days, all from the same address. That's not a neighborhood dispute. That's someone weaponizing the system, so we documented everything, every false report, every bizarre stunt. Eleanor built a file so thorough it resembled preparation for a federal trial. Patricia, our attorney, filed sanctions against Marcus while pushing to accelerate our property case. But the emotional toll was brutal. I lay awake at night calculating how long my savings could last while keeping my daughter safe. Eleanor's health declined under constant stress. Some neighbors whispered about giving up. Then came the turning point. Karen's credibility collapsed so completely that even her closest allies started pulling away. Todd, her longtime supporter, finally spoke out against her in public. When your most loyal follower jumps ship, you know the vessel is already sinking. A few days later, a knock at my door brought a shift I'll never forget. It wasn't another process server, it was federal. Special Agent Sarah Morgan from the FBI Civil Rights Division stood on my porch, crisp navy suit, credentials in hand, her presence carrying the weight of real authority. "Mr. Morrison," she said evenly, "we understand you've been documenting systematic harassment targeting Hispanic families in your community." My stomach dropped. Karen's cruelty had crossed a line straight into federal crime. For 3 hours, Agent Morgan sat in my kitchen, reviewing Eleanor's meticulous files while the smell of her government tissue coffee filled the air. The evidence was overwhelming. False immigration reports, demands to remove cultural decorations, threats questioning a family's right to live here. These weren't just petty disputes. They were civil rights violations, carrying prison terms measured in years. It's not fines. Eleanor's paralegal training had created an airtight case that even federal investigators praised. Witness statements, recordings, timelines, it was all there. Meanwhile, Marcus's prestigious law firm began crumbling under the weight of ethics violations and public scrutiny, collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Emergency meetings shook. Marcus's law firm, as scandals threatened municipal contracts worth hundreds of thousands. Their malpractice insurer questioned coverage for the avalanche of frivolous lawsuits Marcus had unleashed. Meanwhile, the state bar's routine inquiry had escalated into an active prosecution. His partners gave him an ultimatum: either end this neighborhood disaster immediately or face termination, along with potential disbarment that could end his career forever. But the school district crisis revealed Karen's darkest escalation yet. Principal Williams presented security footage showing Karen approaching children on the playground, offering expensive toys while asking disturbing questions about their parents' private lives. The footage showed her targeting not only my daughters, but also kids whose families had dared to oppose her HOA rule. The school district's attorneys prepared criminal referrals for attempted manipulation of minors, and Karen faced permanent bans from school properties across 3 counties. Her surveillance obsession had spiraled into something resembling a suburban spy agency run by someone who'd watched too many thrillers. Private investigators trailed residents to work, photographed license plates in parking lots, and ran background checks on anyone who challenged her authority. The Hendersons were even cornered at their doctor's office by investigators, pressing invasive questions about their medical history and finances. This operation was burning thousands of dollars weekly, proving Karen was either backed by endless funds or completely consumed by desperation. Then came the knockout punch she never expected. County inspectors uncovered $75,000 worth of illegal home additions riddled with safety hazards, faulty electrical wiring that could spark fires, plumbing that violated health codes, and structural changes that made the house borderline unlivable. She was fined $25,000 immediately, with looming costs to either fix everything or tear it all down. The same woman who terrorized neighbors over imaginary violations had been living in a house that broke actual laws. My custody weekend revealed Karen's most reckless gamble. At Riverside Park, she approached Lily and Chloe, offering $100 toys while asking if Daddy ever talked about hurting neighbors or had scary friends at home. Hearing my 8-year-olds describe this left me shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Parents at the park stepped in immediately, one father physically placing himself between Karen and my daughters, while another live-streamed the encounter. The neighborhood transformed into a fortress. parents organized escort rotations for children's activities, installed motion sensor lights, and coordinated with police for hourly patrols. What had once been a safe playground now required strict security protocols. Karen had managed to terrify an entire community, but her reign was about to collapse. Federal charges finally arrived with the full force of government machinery. At 6 a.m., Karen was arrested on multiple civil rights violations, along with charges of stalking, intimidation, and conspiracy. The FBI had been quietly building its case for months. Their documented behavior provided a textbook example of neighborhood harassment rising to federal crime. Marcus avoided charges but was forced into full cooperation or face consequences of his own. The property case moved forward uncontested, awarding our community full title to the disputed land plus $180,000 in damages. Still, when FBI agents led Karen out of her home in handcuffs, the mood wasn't celebratory. Her teenage son sat crying in their car as his father tried to explain how his mother's obsession with control had shattered their family. Agent Morgan's words echoed in my mind. We've seen this pattern before. People in small positions of power can spiral so far into obsession that they cross into federal crimes. For your neighbor, admitting she was wrong felt worse than destroying everyone around her. The federal courthouse in October looked like the set of a legal drama. Reporters lined the steps. Cameras rolled, and 30 Willowbrook residents filled the gallery. The smell of disinfectant mixed with nervous sweat as we waited to see if justice would be real or just theater. Karen shuffled into court in an orange jumpsuit, barely recognizable compared to the polished figure who once cut down my fence. Her fall was so complete that some neighbors didn't realize it was her until she sat down. Marcus sat silently in the front row beside their son, family portrait of consequences that made even her harshest critics uneasy about celebrating. Agent Morgan presented the government's case with precision kneels, recordings, surveillance photos, and financial records painting a year and a half of escalating violations. The gallery gasped when she revealed Karen's surveillance had cost over $90,000 in just 4 months, money siphoned illegally from HOA funds that belonged to all of us. The prosecution pushed for 2 to 3 years in federal prison, plus restitution. Then came the unexpected twist. Karen's attorney revealed psychiatric evaluations showing she had been suffering from undiagnosed bipolar disorder, worsened by prescription drug abuse, anxiety medications obtained from multiple doctors without disclosure. Her spiral wasn't only about power, it was untreated illness combined with dependency, turning her control issues into a genuine danger. When Judge Harrison asked for victim impact statements, I stepped forward carrying my daughter's drawings. They wanted Karen to feel better because somehow, even at 6-year-old children, understand forgiveness better than most adults. Your Honor, I once believed this case was only about property lines and HOA bylaws. At first, it felt like the burden of 30 families' experiences rested squarely on my shoulders. But standing here today, I realize it was never just about fences or rules. It was about what happens when fear and untreated struggles collide with unchecked authority, and how communities can still choose healing over revenge, even when revenge feels justified. I spoke about the fear, the financial stress, and the relentless intimidation that poisoned our neighborhood. But I also shared what we discovered about ourselves. We learned that ordinary people can build extraordinary solidarity when they unite around something bigger than personal grievances. Several reporters began scribbling notes about the community organizing lessons hidden in our story. But it was Eleanor's statement that delivered the moment, which would echo across the evening news. She approached the podium with a thick folder, and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent months documenting every detail of Karen's destructive campaign. Your Honor, Mrs. Delacroix didn't just break rules or misuse funds, Eleanor said, her voice steady with decades of legal experience. She broke the fundamental principle that authority exists to serve communities, not terrorize them. Then Eleanor opened her folder and revealed a truth no one expected. Our investigation showed that Mrs. Delacroix's harassment targeted 14 of the 16 households that had questioned HOA finances in the past 3 years. This wasn't random neighbor conflict, it was deliberate. Retaliation meant to silence oversight and protect a scheme that funneled community money into her family's business. The courtroom erupted in whispers as people absorbed the reality. Karen hadn't just been a difficult neighbor. She had orchestrated an organized campaign of intimidation to shield financial fraud that stole tens of thousands of dollars from working families. Judge Harrison's ruling reflected both the seriousness of her actions and our community's call for justice with compassion. The sentence, 18 months supervised release with mandatory treatment, restitution of $127,000 in misused funds, $18,000 toward community healing programs, and permanent relocation from our neighborhood. The court notes that victims advocating for rehabilitation rather than maximum punishment demonstrates the kind of community character that makes democracy work, the judge declared. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what we had achieved together. The property settlement was swift. Our neighborhood gained clear title to the disputed land along with fair market compensation. Meanwhile, the Delra family relocated for a fresh start, one that might help them truly heal. It's not just move. But the moment etched forever in my memory came as we left the courthouse. Reporter asked what I had learned from fighting Karen's reign of control. I glanced back at the building where justice had been served, then at the 30 neighbors who had transformed from frightened victims into engaged citizens. I learned the best way to defeat a bully isn't by becoming one yourself, I said. It's by building something so strong and positive that bullying no longer matters. That soundbite landed on 3 national news broadcasts. More importantly, it captured what our neighborhood had truly accomplished. We proved that ordinary people can choose extraordinary responses to extraordinary circumstances. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates appeared on the cover of Community Living magazine as Neighborhood of the Year. The article featured glossy photos of children playing on our new accessible playground and a story about an HOA that chose healing over revenge. Property values rose 15%. It's not because we pushed Karen out, but because we proved neighbors could solve extraordinary problems when they work together instead of suffering in silence. Even now, the transformation amazes me each morning as I sip coffee and look out over the community garden that replaced the shadow of Karen's house. Our $230,000 community fund became the gift that kept giving playground equipment that made parents proud, garden beds that produced vegetables for the food bank, and an emergency reserve that ended surprise bills when infrastructure repairs came due. My daughters healed in ways that filled me with pride. Lily no longer flinched when strangers approached at the park, and Chloe finally stopped having nightmares about the angry neighbor with the chainsaw. Family therapy taught us that even frightening experiences can become sources of strength when faced with love and honesty. Their favorite part of our neighborhood now was the community garden, where they learned that beautiful things can grow from ugly beginnings if you're patient and nurturing. Eleanor had transformed from retired paralegal into a full-time community mediator, helping a dozen other neighborhoods resolve disputes without legal wars. Conflict, she often told frustrated residents, is just democracy that hasn't found its voice yet. Her wisdom worked because most neighborhood battles weren't about fences, but about people feeling powerless. Our annual Fence Day celebration became the neighborhood's favorite tradition. It didn't mark Karen's downfall, marked our discovery of strength. This year's barbecue filled the block with laughter, parents connecting instead of avoiding each other, teenagers choosing to stay in the neighborhood instead of running to the mall. Mrs. Whitman's grandson, now 10, became our unofficial historian, recording stories of the time when neighbors learned to be friends. Even Karen's story turned toward hope. Through Marcus, we received updates that she was thriving in Colorado, working with a nonprofit on housing rights and becoming a mental health advocate. In her last note, she expressed gratitude. Your mercy gave my family a chance to heal instead of collapse. The house where the Delacroix once lived became our community center, filled with fresh paint and possibility. Began teaching monthly workshops on property rights and civic participation, ensuring others could avoid what we endured. My favorite moment was always seeing new residents' faces when they realized they lived in a place that genuinely cared. My relationship with Sarah blossomed from a crisis partnership into something permanent, something that made my daughters giggle as they secretly planned wedding decorations. My woodworking hobby turned into a neighborhood service, building fences that symbolized friendship instead of division. When a new family moved into our renovated community center, they were greeted with homemade cookies, help setting up their mailbox, and a neighborhood history told with just enough humor to turn trauma into lessons. Their children joined the chalk drawing empires and backyard soccer leagues. Proof we had created the kind of place where kids could grow up safe, included, and loved. Standing in my backyard last weekend, watching neighbors gather for yet another impromptu barbecue, I realized we had learned something far more valuable than how to resist bullies. We discovered how to build a community so strong, so connected, that bullying itself lost its power. The fence that started it all now marked the edge of a neighborhood where people chose solutions over silence. Got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments below and share your experiences with the HOA Stories community. You are definitely not alone. There are legal, constructive ways to fight back that don't involve chainsaws or FBI agents. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of ordinary people standing tall when small-time tyrants tried to make life miserable. Because sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully isn't with anger, it's with persistence, organization, kindness, and really good documentation. From all of us at HOA Stories, thank you for watching today's episode of Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and justice prevail, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the next HOA showdown.